Hi, and welcome to Somatic-Wise, supporting trauma healing and integration for all life on this planet. You might ask where I am today. It sure is pretty. Am I in a native grassland at the foot of the Sierra Nevada? Nope, I'm right here in the middle of the city in Long Beach, California, at a place now called Willow Springs. Today's video looks at the diverse and varied story of this land through the lens of its many layers: plate tectonics and hydrology, cultures and land use change, biome and biodiversity. This land's story has been challenging at times. My hope is that since now it has stewards who are listening carefully to the land, it may well hopefully be back on its journey to what it always wanted to be. So please stay tuned. The story of the land, now known as Willow Springs, is a very compelling tale of many interwoven layers of geology, hydrology, biodiversity, and human history and cultures. This unique and beautiful land lies between the mouths of two major rivers in a sage scrub habitat of a coastal Mediterranean climate, not quite 34 degrees north of the equator. A branch of the Newport-Inglewood fault line created the beautiful coastal views of its geological uplift. It is the highest elevation in the modern city of Long Beach, California. These plate tectonics also allowed for the emergence of a freshwater stream fed by an underground aquifer. This land supported lush wetlands, tremendous biodiversity, and an indigenous Tongva village named Awanga. All of this existed under the fickle supervision of the meandering Los Angeles River, which, before it was entombed in concrete, would wander back and forth according to its own whims, shaping the land of the entire area now known as Long Beach. Everything else had to work around the river, and so it did. We have every indication that the biodiversity from the biome in the soil up through the larger mammals, was rich, diverse, and thriving. In the 1700s and 1800s, our tale becomes one of deep and brutal loss for the land's original inhabitants, human and non-human. With the advent of North American colonization, Spanish rancheros and livestock took over the land. The human inhabitants, deemed savages in need of religious conversion, were devastated by forced moves to the California missions and by their lack of immunity to European diseases. The wildlife was hunted, particularly to make way for livestock. Even the local plants, the backbone of any ecosystem, began to change substantially as native grasses were replaced by European invasives. As the rancheros eventually sold the land to the white settlers, a second cultural changeover took place. The nascent city, initially known as the American City or Wilmar City, was soon to become Long Beach, and it was granted cityhood. The freshwater springs were used for the requirement of having an independent fresh water supply. As the city grew, the land was parceled into lots. Our landscape, now called somewhere in the vicinity of Lot 57 to 59, was on the verge of being preserved as a great park. But that week, in June of 1921, that was the very week that oil was first discovered nearby. What followed was several decades of industrial horror, a still vibrant and gorgeous ranch landscape now entirely devastated by extraction and toxic contamination. I feel certain these early citizens of Long Beach, guided by the beliefs, values, and scientific knowledge of the times, believed that they were doing the right thing for the future of their young city and also families. With the passage of many decades, public opinion about land use began to change. There was also a reduction of the oil available on site. So gradually, the oil companies began to withdraw from the site, reducing the number of derricks there. The trajectory of this land and the engineering upon it serves as a mirror for the changing cultural values of the times. This land went from being a sacred home, a treasured part of self and family no less important than human mothers, to a commodity generating wealth for rancheros and their livestock, and then another form of commodity for limitless extraction and massive economic gain. The city of Signal Hill actually split off from Long Beach over disagreements about oil taxation. It was only later, in the 1960s, that public narratives began to shift. The environmental conservation movement began in earnest with the public of Rachel Carson's Silent Spring. Fortunately, the worst of all this is now behind us, and the current state of the land is one of hope, trust, potential, stewardship, cooperation, restoration, and re-emerging beauty. The purpose of this video is to illuminate the complexity of this amazing land, geological, geographical, biological, and cultural, and also to examine its current state as well as visions for its future. My hope is that this land story will interest you and inspire you to visit, to begin to form your own relationships with the re-emerging beauty of this resilient and amazing place. I myself was involved in some of the initial meetings and discussions as a coalition of environmentalists began to organize in the early 2000s with the intent of protecting and preserving this devastated and almost forgotten place. Fortunately, while my own life path led me in a different direction for a while, a number of dedicated individuals continued and still continue dedicating untold hours towards its restoration. I am deeply indebted to the work of Larry Rich, Blanca Diaz, and the Long Beach Department of Sustainability for their persistence, their deep caring for this land, and their expertise in helping it return to what it essentially wants to be. In fact, I believe all of us are indebted to their beautiful work. The city of Long Beach began the restoration of this land 10 years ago in 2012. This is what it looked like when the land was reacquired by the Department of Sustainability. As you can see, it was basically trashed. The majority of the old oil derricks were gone, although some remained and still do to this day. The land was littered by industrial and dumped garbage, the ground crisscrossed by metal pipes, and its contaminated soils supporting mostly invasive plants such as mustard and Russian thistle. Slowly, the restoration proceeded. Around the same time, a young mother-to-be who wanted to be connected with the land and available to her child began one of Long Beach's major working urban farms here, Farm Lot 59. Farm Lot 59 is a small nonprofit and a working urban farm. Its founder, Sasha Kano, was kind enough to speak with me as she was working the farm and supervising her farming students. She is passionate about the value of locally grown food and helping people reconnect to our place in the cycles of land, water, sun, and food. All of the food grown here is donated to the Long Beach Food Bank to support those who are still struggling. Her website has great information about her story and about the challenges and nuances of urban farming. And this is what Willow Springs looks like today in early 2022. Yes, the site still clearly looks rough in some places. It's a patchwork of restored beauty, and to be quite honest, the land is still somewhat beat up from its treatment the last few hundred years, and particularly the 1900s. The larger question remains throughout the world, and Willow Springs is a microcosm and a reflection of that world and that question. How can we humans meet our energy needs without destroying the very land that supports us? Of course, this remains largely unresolved. But you know what? Restoration works. Wildlife is here. It's coming back. It has a home here. This is especially important because the California Floristic Province is a biodiversity hotspot. That is, it's one of 36 places around the world in which there is amazing biodiversity, much more so than most other places, many diverse and unique species, and it's also severely threatened by human activities. Also, the coastal sage scrub itself is a rare biome because so many humans are drawn to live along the California coastline. So this hugely biodiverse biome is very threatened. So urban spaces really count, and it can restore us people too. This brings us to visions for the future of the land. One of the major problems faced by our city is that of unequal access to nature and open spaces. My sense is that this is particularly painful for indigenous people, the original human stewards of this land. In these cultures, the land is completely sacred and is very deeply a part of the people, so the takeover and the desecration of the land leaves very deep wounds. Mind you, I cannot speak for indigenous or other BIPOC cultures. I can only convey my understanding of what their peoples may have been through in an attempt to increase recognition, support, and inclusion, and to amplify the call for greater involvement in land use decisions. I myself would argue that such a connection to land is how things need to be for all of us humans, as every scrap of our bodies and who we are is literally made from and maintained by the land and earthy cycles. The understanding that it is not in our best interest to ignore this fact is becoming increasingly prominent in the cultural mainstream. For folks growing up and living in the inner city, there can be many obstacles to going outdoors and developing relationships with nature. These may be practical, social, economic, and also may be associated with a variety of traumatic experiences. Zip codes with more BIPOC, Black, Indigenous, People of Color folks, and fewer economic resources also tend to have much less nature and open spaces, and this is visible on maps. Willow Springs, however, is right in the middle of the city and is surrounded by major streets, including public transportation. So one of the endeavors of the Sustainability Department is to increase welcoming and involvement by BIPOC folks. In this regard, I'm deeply grateful that this land was not converted into a pay-to-play sports park as had been suggested. There are now major plans in the development stages to help support BIPOC folks, including equality, inclusivity of access, and forming relationships with the land. The restoration of Willow Springs continued. I myself have volunteered on several occasions, pulling out invasive mustard and thistle to make way for the locally native plants. So let's return to this important message that this land has to offer. Restoration works. iNaturalist is an app that collects data about what plants and animals were where and when. This is the iNat page for Willow Springs, and you can see how much biodiversity is here. By contrast, we can look at the biodiversity at the cement recycling factory that remains in one corner of the site. Not a lot of biodiversity is right there. If you help the land restore the ecosystem created by the soil, moisture, and native plants, the nature itself returns, a tiny fragment of urban wilderness. Every time I go there, I see so many birds, red-tailed hawks soaring the skies. Restoration works, and it restores our souls along with it. It just feels good to be on site. As I step into the field office of the Sustainability Department, I step out of the surrounding noisy roar of the city and the unrelenting demands of my schedule. I notice this place, which is really more like a little permaculture farm and plant nursery than an office, is cradled between an uprise and a vernal pool, and the land cradles you, too, along with the rabbits and chickens they have rescued. Although earlier human involvement exhausted the original spring, the folks at Sustainability have brought back the water on site, redirecting and filtering what would have been an urban runoff. And with that water comes much of the biodiversity and the beauty. It feels good to be here. Time slows down. One can be more present in the immediate moment, rather than moving disembodied through emails and to-do lists. The bees from the hives on the hill buzz peacefully around, collecting their pollen. Hawks try and swoop in on the chickens, forcing Larry to get up and hustle them back inside. Being here nurtures the soul, and they're not even done yet. Won't you come and join us? Be a part of this land's revival and meet some wonderful people along the way. What can you learn about your own self from the mirror of this land? You'll never know if you don't come find out. A more complete presentation about the history of this land by Larry Rich and Blanca Diaz of the Long Beach Department of Sustainability is available at the Orange County, California Native Plant website, and I will post the link in the description. Thank you for watching Somatic Wise. Thank you for watching Somatic Wise. If you enjoyed this video, please consider hitting the like and subscribe buttons, because that will help YouTube show this to more people. Till next time, take care.